Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyen Books podcast and streaming series. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee, and I'm very, very excited for our special presentation this evening. V, formerly Eve Ensler, Tony Award-winning best-selling author of the Vagina Monologues, is here in conversation with award-winning journalist and international best-selling author Naomi Klein about V's new book, Reckoning. Before we get to their full introductions, Banyen Books acknowledges that although we have people joining us from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyen Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Most of Banyen's events and podcast series are free. We welcome you to make a donation to keep these programs accessible for all. Just go ahead and click on the PayPal link in the show description below, and we appreciate your support. Also, in the last 15 minutes or so of the conversation today, we'll be taking questions from you, our live audience. So go ahead and type those in to the comments field on YouTube. V, formerly Eve Ensler, is a Tony Award-winning playwright, author, performer, and activist. Her international phenomenon, the Vagina Monologues, has been published in 48 languages and performed in more than 140 countries. She's the author of The Apology, the New York Times bestseller, I Am an Emotional Creature, the highly praised In the Body of the World, and many more. She is the founder of V-Day, the global activist movement to end violence against women and girls, and 1 Billion Rising, the largest global mass action to end gender-based violence in over 200 countries. She is a co-founder of the City of Joy, a revolutionary center for women survivors of violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And she is one of Newsweek's 150 Women Who Changed the World and The Guardian's 100 Most Influential Women. Her website is eveensler.org. And this evening, V is in conversation with Naomi Klein about her new book, Reckoning. Naomi Klein is an award-winning journalist, columnist, and the international best-selling author of 9 books published in over 35 languages, including No Logo, The Shock Doctrine, This Changes Everything, No Is Not Enough, On Fire, and Doppelganger, A Trip into the Mirror World. She's a columnist for The Guardian and a contributor for Mehdi Hasan's Zeteo news site. Since 2021, she has been an associate professor in geography at University of British Columbia and is the founding co-director of UBC's Center for Climate Justice. Her website is naomiklein.org. About V's book, Reckoning. Reckoning invites you to travel the journey of a writer's and activist's life and process over 40 years, representing both the core of ideas that have become global movements and the methods through which V survived abuse and self-hatred. Unflinching, intimate, introspective, courageous, Reckoning explores ways to create an unstoppable force for change, to love and survive love, to hold people and states accountable, to reckon with demons and honor the dead, to reclaim the body, and to see oneself as connected to a greater purpose. Banyen Books community, please join me in a very warm welcome for this special presentation with V and Naomi Klein. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am so excited about this. I am so happy to be here. I am speaking to you from unceded Shishot territory on the Sunshine Coast. Very grateful to Banyen Books for hosting us, and delighted to be celebrating the paperback release of Reckoning, a book I adore, that I feel deeply connected to. On the cover of the book, I call it an electric call to heal our broken world, and it most certainly is that. It is incredibly hard to describe because it is such a unique work. It is filled with artifacts from a life deeply lived, a feminist life, an internationalist life, an artist's life, a revolutionary's life. It is brimming with poetry, theater, philosophy, reportage, and it is this profound offering about some of the most important themes and ideas right now. Specifically, how we might transform pain and trauma into something very different, something new and powerful and beautiful, rather than staying for all of eternity in a trauma replication loop. The book was written and edited before this genocidal juncture, but I deeply believe that it is one of the works that speaks most directly to it. So many of us have been struggling with the way that unreckoned with trauma replicates, moves around the globe, reproduces, deepens, and there is really nobody on this earth who I have met who has thought more deeply and more creatively about trauma than V. So I'm so happy to be able to have this conversation with you, V, to host your questions a little bit later on. Congratulations on the paperback release of this beautiful book. A little bit of trivia.
Yeah.
I took the back picture photograph of this book. It's
an amazing photograph. And it's all real. We didn't make
it. Is that it happened, that there was this rainbow over purple sky at these incredible home in New York State, and V was wearing that, matching the sky, and put her arms up. So all I did was just realize it was a photograph. V, will you start us off with a reading, and then we'll talk about what reckoning means?
I will, but first I just have to say how happy I am to be here with you. And also, I love that picture so much. And it wasn't just like, okay, New York is like raining and pouring, and the lights are going on and off. Okay, stay on, light. Sorry.
Ooh, spooky.
Okay, well, it's going to be what it is. But I just wanted to say, you said you only take the picture, but one of your great gifts is being able to see what's there, and to bring synthesis to patterns and understanding. So it wasn't just you took the picture, you saw the picture. Anyway, I'm so happy to be in conversation with you at any point in time. And I thought I'd begin with this piece that's really about my mother, but it's really about mother hunger. And it's called My Mother Was Not My Mother. My mother was not my mother. I was the property of my father. I was his thing, like a chair, like a dried leaf, like a broken telephone. My mother and I never bonded. I don't remember her body. I don't crave her breasts. I would not find her instinctively in a crowd. When I was 40, we had our first conversation. My father was dead then. We were relaxed. It took me until I was 42 to begin to see my mother through my eyes and not my father's. My mother is funny. She does a singing, whistling thing when she's by herself. It would have become a dance if she had been happy. She is thin. After she had lung cancer and they took a lung, her breasts shrunk, and now she can wear dresses that are too tight for me. We have the same body. It's a body that doesn't gain weight, except later a little in the stomach. It's a body that gets skinny when it gets old and sick. It's athletic. It needs to move. My mother and I both like to sleep late. The early morning makes us feel suicidal. There's no veil and it hurts so early. We are night birds. It's past midnight now and she's still awake in her room. Before, I would have been paralyzed in her loneliness. I always thought my mother was a coward. I had contempt for her. She watched me get beaten. She watched me get bloody noses in restaurants. She never protected me. She told me it was my fault. She didn't leave my father. My father was 17 years older than my mother. He had money, and he made her feel stupid. She had his babies. I was one of them. But I was his thing, like a sharp pencil, like a torn map, like an empty glass. I did not have a mother. When I was 42, my mother put aloe on my sunburn. I think I burned myself so she would touch me. She was so tender, I think we both were surprised. I felt for the first time that she liked me. I wanted to cry. I didn't mind her smell. I saw that she was kind. When I was 39, I told my mother that my father raped me. It was raining and there was a big sea storm. All the roads were flooded. My mother wanted to leave the room, but she didn't. She watched and I watched something getting free. Next morning, she called at 6 a.m. I knew this was extreme because she does not get up early. She was weeping and she knew it was true. I had betrayed her and she had betrayed me, and we didn't even know each other. Right then, we stopped being other people's property. The next day, we visited the Wounded Bird Museum in Sarasota, Florida. It was overcast and a big pelican was limping. Most of the birds were broken. They would never fly again or leave their wounded bird cages. Months later, my mother called and she asked me what she would do if my father came to her after she died and was mad at her because she believed me over him. What if he felt betrayed? I said my father was dead, but I could feel him too. My mother buys me things and we spend his money. We are filled with this wild, frenzied glee. Sometimes she still speaks his opinions. I know because she's usually had a few cocktails. Her face changes and she looks angry like him. I don't like her then, or I don't like what she's saying. I think my mother's proud of me. I think she is happy alone. It's calm, quiet, not violent where she lives by the sea. There are other widows by the pool, and she is wild for the pelicans.
Thank you so much for that. One of so many exquisite pieces in this book. And it makes me want to start somewhere that I was going to get to a little bit later, which has to do with you do a lot of work in this book where you really go into the pain, into the hardest places, with great specificity, with an artist's and poet's eye. But that's also you modeling something that you want us to understand about what it means to reckon and what it means to go there when it comes to the wound, personally and collectively. You've talked about the wound as a portal. So after hearing you do that in one part of your life, and there's other writing in the book about describing finding a photograph of yourself beaten as a baby. Why is it so important to go there? Because I think there is such an impulse to look away. What does it have to do with reckoning, personally and collectively? Which I guess is related to what does reckoning mean? I mean, it's a word that gets tossed around. I think sometimes we think it just means looking at something bad. how will we know a true reckoning when it happens? What are the elements of it?
Well, I think it's usually the place you don't want to go. I mean, that's the first sign. It's the place you don't want to touch. It's the place that feels unbearable. It's a place that feels if you go there, you'll break into 1,000 pieces. In fact, my experience has been, and I think I came to this experience because I was so profoundly disembodied for so long, that when the early experiences of my childhood happened, I left my body at a very young age, and I was literally disassociated for so many years. And that disassociation led me to a lot of self-harm and a lot of destruction and a lot of depression. And I realized over time that what I was most afraid of was remembering. What I was most afraid of was touching a pain that I had already been through, but I hadn't been through because my consciousness had been split off. So I hadn't been able to integrate that experience when I was going through it. And so what I was hovering above it and hovering above my life and hovering above everything, because I wasn't allowing myself to basically bring myself back together, to re-glue myself, to reimagine myself, to repossess myself. And I think what I learned, and one of the ways I learned this, is I was very, very, very drawn to hearing and knowing and feeling and being with other women's stories. I felt somehow if I could do that, if I could be witness, if I could be presence, if I could take in other women's stories, I could at least do for them what I couldn't have done for myself, which is be embodied and be full and be with them so that they could have a mirror, or at least they could have the space to tell their stories, to be realized, to be held just in presence, right? And I think by doing that, what I began to realize is that there was this profound, transformative and transfigurative element to telling one's deepest story, which I literally could sometimes see with particles getting freed from women, like energy things coming out of them that I could see were literally things that had been clutched and had been hardened and had turned to sickness and had turned to stress and had turned to anxiety. And I think in America, at any rate, we are fed this notion that we can't go near pain and that pain will kill us and pain will destroy us. And so we medicate with every kind of form, whether it's food or pharmaceuticals or shopping or anything to avoid. And I think that's really what has allowed the state and the consumer state and the capitalist state to own us. I think it is this dispossession of self and dispossession of feelings and dispossession of memory, right? We are diabolically amnesiac in America. We have surrendered what needs to be remembered so deeply. And it is in the surrendering of that we are captured. We are captured and owned by this capitalist state, mind state. And I've learned in my life that, we made a joke. You gave me this really funny T-shirt for my birthday, which said, "I am a trigger," right? And I think sometimes, I feel where we think we will die or where we think a memory will absolutely eviscerate us, the exact opposite occurs. Like when we get to the core of the wound, when we touch the wound, when we're in the hot lava place of the wound and we're burning up, that's when the freedom begins to come. That's when the liberation begins to come. That's when the reckoning begins to come. And I think until we go there, we are constantly, it's like one of those records that's just going around and around. We're just going back to it and going back to it and going back to it and going back to it.
Because we don't actually go to it.
Because we don't go to it. Exactly. And I'm not saying we should always do this alone. I think we should do this with therapists and with healers and with partners and with friends. But what I do know is this country has never touched on its story, has never gone back to the beginning of the stealing of lands, of genocide, of the destruction of the people who are here, of the destruction of people's traditions, of moving people off their lands. We can just go on and on. We've never We've never died into that experience. We've never felt that experience, so that we're still on some level repeating it and continuing it in various other forms. We may not be repeating it in the same form, but the event of it is still being actualized in other ways.
Yeah, or we go to it and we look, but we don't try to change. And that, I think, relates to your work around apology and what that actually does. Because I think we've had these moments where we seem to look, but then the backlash to that is so severe. The white lash, the insistence on forgetting, and so I want to come back to that. I want to come back to what we do once we go there, because to avoid this backlash, or if there is a way of avoiding that backlash. But this relates to the fact that you did this writing, a lot of it during the pandemic, or the compiling of the book, the editing, some new writing. I also wrote a book during the pandemic, which also related to things that were being unveiled and different ways that people responded to things that are very difficult to look at directly. I mean, some people sort of disappear into the self, into narcissism, into, perfecting their brand. And some people just disappear into conspiracy, which is, a lot of what I was sort of tracking. I want to talk about your writing process, because you did something else, which is you spent a lot of time looking inwards, and you're somebody who has moved pretty incessantly through your life. I mean, I mentioned that that this is a record of a life very well and deeply lived, an internationalist life, a revolutionary life, but a very, very, very busy life, building organizations and showing up and doing performances of the Vagina Monologues in Croatia and everywhere around this planet. So I guess I want to hear from you about the relationship between speed and reckoning, because it feels like both on a personal level for you and collectively, this reckoning, that the 2020 racial justice reckoning, or in Canada, the reckoning of the unmarked raised and Indigenous, in former so-called residential schools, the burial grounds of Indigenous children who've been stolen from their families. I do sometimes wonder how much of this related to the fact that life was slower then, that people were and so describe the writing, like what was the process like for you? Because you were going back, you were looking at your own life, you were stopping, you were reevaluating, you were excavating. What was it? Tell us a little bit about what it was like and what that relationship is.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking about time. I remember when I once went to Google, and on the wall, on Facebook, on the wall, it said, move fast. Their motto was move fast and break things, right? And I remember thinking, that is the most insane thing I've ever heard. Move fast and break things, right? And for me, COVID was move slow and remember things. Move slow and know things. Move slow and touch things. Move slow and go into things. And I guess what I thought was happening, I think for those of us who were privileged enough and lucky enough not to be on the front lines wearing garbage bags in hospitals and, as nurses and serving people in the way so many so generously did during COVID, we were really locked in with ourselves, with our minds, with our past, with our memories, with our anxieties, with our dreads. And we couldn't really move. And I, for myself, began to see why I had been moving for so many years, because it was kind of terrifying and horrifying to suddenly have to stop and be with me and be with memory and be with reflection and look at things in my life that were difficult, things I wished I had done better, things where I wished I had participated in different kinds of ways, but also what was happening around us seemed really profound. We were reckoning with the fact that we didn't have a healthcare system. right? That was only serving a very limited amount of people, and particularly not serving Black and brown people or poor people. We were reckoning with that diabolical moment with George Floyd, with that knee on his neck, and those shocking 9 minutes. And then this kind of amazing reckoning that began to happen in the streets around police violence towards Black people. And then there was the reckoning about climate change, and suddenly everything stopped, and suddenly the skies were getting clean, and animals were coming to visit, and it felt like we were living in this amazing world. And I thought we were actually going through this global, mystical, political reckoning that I wanted to be part of. And I think putting this book together was my offering, as was your brilliant book, Doppelganger, our offering to that reckoning, to move it deeper, to move it further, to move it towards something. And what I have learned, and what COVID taught me, and certainly what my cancer taught me, is that I can no longer move fast and break things. I can no longer move at a speed where I do not take in the people I am dealing with, talking to, knowing, but also where I am able to be present in a way where I can allow the alchemy of relationship and the alchemy of touch and the alchemy of knowing somebody and feeling what they're feeling in that morning moment to rush past me. And I think that radically changed things for me. Radically. I mean, I live in the country, I live in the woods, I move at the space of the woods, and that is a very different pace than, like, I'm in New York right now, and it's like, oh my God, it's just moving at that pace again, But I think also, reckoning is slow. Reckoning is deep. You have to go piece by piece by piece, and it's unveiling, it's unraveling, it's dismantling. And if you rip it, you do break things. If you rip it, you hurt things. And I think one of the things that's happened in this country is we do things too fast. We don't take the time, we don't value these processes in a way where we take the time to do it deeply, so that the backlash happens because we haven't really done it in a way that's satisfying and that's profound and that's integrated and whole, right?
Mm-hmm. And this, this book is very much in conversation with your book, The Apology, and there, you write about the power of an apology, because that book wasn't the theory, it was the practice of you going into giving yourself the apology from your father in his voice, a kind of a channeling of his voice, the apology that you needed and deserved and never got from him.
Mm-hmm.
And that book was very well received, but I remember there was one piece about it which was sort of resistant, like I think was mistaking an attempt to understand violence and abuse with justifying it,
Mm-hmm.
almost as if an attempt to understand something is to justify it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that may be part of why we stay stuck, because actually that idea is quite prevalent. So it would be, I think, really useful to hear you talk about how you see the difference between that going into the mindset of an abuser, whether individually or collectively, and justifying it. What is the value of it?
Well, I'm so happy you're just bringing up this distinction. And I just want to say that I think that for me, for so many years, whether I acknowledged it or not consciously, I was still inside my father's narrative. When I was responding to it, when I was angry at it, when I was proving myself, when I was showing him, it was still his story. And I was still in response and reaction to his story. And there came a point in my life where I realized that two things. One, that patriarchy is essentially based on, one of the central columns to patriarchy is the non-apology, the refusal to humble oneself, to see where one might be wrong, to see where one went astray, to see where one did something that was not correct, and that was one piece of it. But the other piece of it was that I didn't want to be in my father's story anymore. And I had this sense that if I could climb into my father, because I think anybody who's been abused by anybody, particularly physically, you have the introject of that person already inside you, the implants already in your cells and in your, all through your makeup. They're there. So the question is, can you inhabit them in a way where you can actually go inside them and begin to understand? And by understanding, I mean, who was my father? Who did he begin as? What was his origin story? Who was he inside a patriarchal system, and who did he become in a very mutated way inside that system? And then what did he do to me, and what were the details of what he did through his perspective? Could I climb into that, and could I begin to see it, and could I be understanding? Because understanding is fucking liberation. It is liberation. And that doesn't mean I liked it, I justified it, or I even forgave it. Let me be clear. It means I understood it so that I came to know it had nothing to do with me. It was my father's. It was his story. It was his piece. It was his inability, unwillingness to look inside his own reality, his own story, to change, to transform, to wake up. And I think sometimes we are really scared to try to understand why people do what they do, because we're so afraid we're going to legitimize it, or we're going to say, we're going to sign off on it, or we're going to co-sign it, or we're going to say it's okay, rather than giving ourselves this understanding that it's that and not this, and seeing where we're separate from it, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, I can't help but think about Palestine and Israel and these kind of parallel stories that play out, that don't intersect at all. And so, as I said, this book predates October 7th and the horrific moment that we're in, but it speaks to it in so many ways. I think I mean, we could go on and on, but in terms of what Zionism did vis-a-vis the Holocaust, and whether or not we ever really went there in terms of into that pain, or whether it was just instrumentalized into another story, and that story being the creation of the state of Israel, and then what happens to that pain. But you've also, I would just like to hear you speak about how you feel like this work. I mean, nobody could be prepared for a moment like this, but what are you bringing from this work to how you are meeting this moment of endless, horrific, live stream genocide?
Well, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is that I've been thinking a lot about helplessness. I'm really inside it a lot lately, because I feel all of us feel so helpless in some ways, even though we're doing everything we possibly can there. And I think I was a person who studied and obsessively the Holocaust, like detail, read books, looked at pictures, have seen every movie, because I'm always struck by the helplessness, by the, why didn't anybody stop this? What? And I think I'm really beginning to understand that the militarization of helplessness without processing it is what fascism is what fascism is. Like if I bring it back to my father, for example, my father had a story where he was made to feel humiliated and devastated and shamed by his brother. And rather than my father feeling his helplessness, rather than him dying into that and weeping over it and experiencing it and going through it, he created a persona. He created a state. Do you know what I mean? He created a Zionist shield. He created another world to protect him, prevent him from ever experiencing those feelings of helplessness again, right? And that's, first of all, highly unrealistic, because we're always helpless. We're helpless being alive. We're in an existential dilemma. What are we even doing here? When will we dive? How will it happen? Who decides? We're always helpless. So we're always insecure. I mean, I wrote a book years ago calling Insecure at Last, because I've been struggling with this notion my whole life of how do we really allow ourselves to release ourselves into our helplessness in a way where it becomes the depth of our compassion, the depth of our connection. And, I'm working on this mental health piece right now, which I'm really deep into right now. And I was writing about a father of a bipolar young woman, his daughter. And he says at one point in this piece, when he watched her when she was 16 get taken away because she had destroyed the house and she was put in restraints, and then he saw her in a straitjacket and through a little window and a grim psyche wore, and she was like on the floor, curled up like an animal. And he said, the helplessness. I was a helpless father. I was a helpless person. And he says in this, he said, you will want to escape these feelings. You will want to have it be rage. You will want to have it be anger. But don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Stay with the helplessness, because the helplessness is the pathway to compassion and true bravery. That is what true bravery is. And that is not to say we want to be constantly in a helpless state where people are abusing and destroying us. But if you have been abused and you have experienced that helplessness, you have to go back to re-experience it in order to actually embody yourself into your true strength. You will have a fraudulent strength. You will have a distant strength. You will have a macho strength. You will have a very, very violent strength if you do not do that. And I think that's what we're seeing right now with Israel and with Zionism. This slaughter, this mayhem, this violence that it feels, it's so extreme and it's so disembodied.
Mm-hmm.
It's so deeply disembodied.
Unapologetic, right? Yeah.
Unapologetic. Absolutely righteous, claiming, always the victim, always the victim. And these are the qualities of that. And I think
it's a true breakdown, a true public breakdown by a nation. Like, I don't think we've ever seen this kind of unhingedness, right? Like the US after 9/11 acted that way for a few weeks, but this is, we're going into the 9th continuous month, right?
And scarily an unhingedness masked as like superpowerness. Do you know, it's this flip using weapons that can destroy stadiums on children. Do you know, it's so extreme. It's so the magnitude of the violence in relation to even what's being destroyed is so huge.
A tent.
Yeah, exactly. A tent.
Or many tents. You wanted to maybe share something specifically about Rafa, and I wanted to create some space for that.
Well, I read this piece. I know all of us, or many of us, who in the last few days, I think sometimes I had a birthday last week and my heart was really open and I felt really loved. It was one of the first days since October 7th that I let myself go there. And then Rafa happened the next morning. And I felt so, I felt so devastated, and I saw this piece, this just writing, and it just was so, anyway, I want to read it. I left my children playing in the tent. I hugged them as it felt like the last hug. I left to cook them something to eat. I came back panicking as I heard the airstrikes. I found my 6 children that couldn't fit in the tent. They burnt and became ash. I carried the 6 in my arm as if it were a handful of sand. I continued hugging and kissing them. My 6 children whirled. They became the size of a handful of sand.
I mean, I I wasn't aware that you were going to read that. It's the most devastating.
And you know, we have to look at it.
Yeah.
We have to read it. We have to look at it. It's painful. It's horrendous. But we are all responsible for this. We are all part of this. And we are part of the helplessness, but we are also part of what could stop it. And that is when you realize your helplessness, you also realize you are part of something that can change it and transform it, because you are inside the human story where we're all helpless, you know?
And the effort it takes, whether people are conscious of it or not, to look away is really quite destroying. You know, what you were saying about helplessness, I feel like, you know, what I mean, in the work that I've done around just different kinds of disasters, it's always that inability to help that is most traumatic for people. You know, I remember after the tsunami in Asia in 2004, that it was parents describing, you know, seeing their children and not being able to reach them, you know, or similar testimonies from different disaster zones, and it's so horrible to not be able to help. It's not the pain to oneself that one experiences oneself that is actually what is most scarring. And so, I mean, it really makes me think about all, like, the cure for helplessness is helping, you know, and so much of the writing in the book is really about attempts to help in ways that you were not helped, in ways that experience of not being helped. I mean, the reading you started us with about your mother, whose job is to help you, not have that foundational unhelping and helplessness, and how you chose to, you know, by going there, I think make some really important choices in your life that we can all learn from, and are really a model. Before we open it up to questions, and we're gonna have Ross come back with some questions from all of you. And if you haven't posted your question in the chat, please do. You know, one of the things that I love about your work and your writing, and this book in particular, is this. And there's so much honesty about pain, but the pain is not proprietary or precious. I mean, there's really, I think your attitude is nobody gets away without pain, and it may be unevenly distributed, but it can actually be something that connects us rather than divides us. So I would like to hear you speak a little bit about the way you see the transformative power of this as something that can be a basis for revolutionary change.
Yeah. You know, I also just want to go back to something you were saying before about helplessness and help. You know, sometimes, you know, I remember when I was in this refugee camp in Pakistan with Bosnian refugees, and everybody was sick. And I would sit with them all day, and everyone would just cry all day and tell their stories and cry all day. And I kept thinking I had to help them, and I had to help them, and I had to help them. And one day the people said, "You are helping us. You're listening to us. You're experiencing helplessness with us. And we're not alone in our helplessness." And I realized, oh, that's what we need. We need to know we're not alone in our helplessness, you know? And if you're feeling yours and I'm feeling mine, and you're not above me because you're not unhelpless, but we're in this together, we can transform. I think, you know, I remember when I got stage 3/4 uterine cancer, and I had one day, one day where I felt sorry for myself. And I was like, why me? Why me? And then I heard a voice in me say, why the fuck not you? What did you think? You were going to escape this? You were going to escape and not have the human experience that everybody else on this planet is having? And I think pain is a piece of it. And we make so much of it that we're so afraid of it that we don't touch it. But joy is a piece of it, and love is a piece of it, and sex is a piece of it, and dancing is a piece of it. And I don't see pain as any bigger or worthy of more space or less space than any of the others. And I think if you grow up in a culture that is constantly teaching you shouldn't have pain, you must stay away from the pain, pain will kill you, pain will destroy you, pain becomes so big, it becomes so unbearable, it becomes so, you just can't go near it. And I think, I think humor helps with pain. I think, I don't think pain is gonna. I think pain is a pathway, and pain is a doorway. And I think there's ways that when you get to the height of a certain kind of pain, it automatically trips into joy, or it trips into humor, or it trips into another feeling. But if you sit by the river, you know what I mean, and you don't let yourself go with the grief, for example, right? While the grief is, if you sit there and you watch it, the grief gets harder and more fixed and more, and it becomes disease, and it becomes hurt, and it becomes something that's really going to start working at you. But if you get into the river of grief and you go with it, it will take you someplace else. It will bring you someplace else, just like pain will. And I think what I get scared about this culture is we are metastasized people. Our pain has metastasized. We so many people in this culture have cancers. So many people in this culture have illnesses that come from stress hardening, or unprocessed pain becoming tumors. Or, I used to say that bullets, bullets were frozen tears, right? Just unexpressed tears. And I think we need to create a language and a way with each other that we stop pretending we're not in pain. We stop pretending we're above pain. We stop pretending like we're somehow above the human experience and we're not having this, but that we're all in this together. And you can have your moment to cry, and I can have my moment to cry, and you can have your moment to rage, and we can all do this together, as opposed to feeling like we are so lonely and so by ourselves and so cast out when we are feeling pain, when everybody is feeling it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. And we do have a few, hi.
Hello. It's so wonderful to be listening to both of you in this conversation. It's really powerful.
Thank you.
And we're gonna have one last reading after the questions.
Yes, yeah. So we've got some audience questions coming in, some in the chat here, and some have come in by email. And our awesome producer Jacob has sent me some of those. The first one is from Jennifer, who says, "What can we do as people who feel loyalty and love for those who may have caused harm? How hard is it to accept the victim's stories and also hold on to our loyalty and love for those who have caused harm?"
I think for me, I can only share for me, and maybe Naomi, you'll have a different take on this. I can't feel loyalty necessarily to people who have caused harm to me, okay, unless we're willing to process it. Like, I can't not be in truth in that story, because then I can't be in real relationship for them. And if that means having a hard conversation, if that means saying, can we open the door to this? Can we process this? Can we talk about this? For me, it's worth it, because we're freeing each other. We're freeing each other. When I went to my mother and I said to my mother, and I said to her, I will come and see you if you will let me tell you what I have to tell you. And she agreed. And I sat there and I told her that her husband, my father, had raped me. I knew it could end our relationship, but I knew I couldn't have a relationship with my mother unless I told her that, because we would not be in truth with each other. And fortunately, my mother heard it, acknowledged it, and was willing to go through the journey of that. So I think what I've learned is that, what relationship do you want? Do you want a superficial relationship that doesn't touch it? And we go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, where we're starting to create this disembodied, disassociated relationship because we can't go near the truth and we have to always veer around it, even though it's in the center of us? Or do we want to create a relationship where we both carefully and lovingly deal with this thing that is between us? And to me, that is the most exciting thing about relationships, is how do we do that? And how do we keep processing it? And how do we keep cleaning it up so we don't create more and more tumors between us? No?
Did you have any comments to add on that one, Naomi? There's a question here from Francesca, who's curious, V, what are some of the modalities or practices you've utilized in your healing journey with trauma and also through cancer?
Just name it. I think I've really used so many. I mean, beginning with 12-step programs. I've been in every kind of therapy, from Freudian to Jungian to somatic therapy to rage therapy to incest groups to plant medicine, which has been very, very, very helpful in breaking through a lot of places where I was really stuck and I couldn't get beyond myself, and getting beyond myself got me much more into myself. Cancer, for me, was all about how I was going to come back into my body, because for me, being outside my body, I had no awareness of what was going on in it. So I grew a tumor the size of a mango and didn't even know it was inside me. And so the practices I have now of being in my body are, I'm deeply connected to the Mother Earth, and I do prayer regularly, and my prayer really involves connection to the earth, whether it's sitting by trees or lying on the earth or sitting under the stars or being connected. And I think anything for me that brings me into my body, that brings me closer, really closer to my own divine nature, which is the divine nature of nature, like where we're connected, going in both directions. That is where I get healed. Whether it's just going outside and sitting in sunlight for 30 minutes in a writing day and letting light just penetrate all my cells and feeling that just go into me and knowing that I'm getting healed in some essential way. Or just digging my hands in the garden for an hour and feeling dirt underneath my fingernails. Those I find, and the other thing I just want to say, particularly for women, and I feel really strongly about this because I'm reading all the ways that women get sick as we get aging, and osteoporosis is one of the main ways that women really descend and get sick, is that lifting weights and building up your body strength is really, really critical, because if you build up your core and if you build up all your muscular, you feel very confident and strong as a woman. And this has a profound impact, I am convinced, on your longevity and how you will live into old age.
Weightlifting and tree hugging. You heard it here first.
I love Naomi's summations. Thank you so much.
That is a really good summary.
I love you, Naomi.
You too.
So much.
There's one here from Wendy that she emailed in. It says, V, can you tell us more about the mental health piece that you're working on right now? Is it a new book?
No, it's actually a new play. I've been working on it for a while. I'm writing it for NAMI, National Mental Health Alliance, hired me to do this to help break stigma and taboos, so we could really begin to talk about our mental wellness and our mental health in ways we haven't talked about it before. And to, one of the wonderful things about writing this new piece and what I'm learning is, what is mental health? I mean, it's just such a huge question. And one of the things I'm realizing is it's like we're all in this huge ozone layer, right? Which is our mental health. It's there. And that ozone layer is very, very, very unhealthy. I mean, there are so many things in that zone that don't belong there, beginning with misogyny and capitalism and racism and colonialism. And we can just go down the list, right? And so part of, I think, what happens is it goes into every person differently, right? Some people react with OCD, some people react with depression. But part of it is what we got to do is we got to clean up the ozone layer if we're going to get well. And that's not a me project, that's a we project. And I think so much of mental health has been constructed about it's your problem, it's an I problem. You go to therapy, you take the drugs, you fix yourself. Completely impossible. Completely impossible. Unless we fix the structure, unless we fix the swell that we're in, we will constantly be sick. And I just want to say one thing about that. Like at the City of Joy in the Congo, which is this beautiful place I'm proud to be a part of, there is no individual therapy, because the women who come there are women who have been seriously sexually abused in the war, and they come with really profound wounds. But there is a fundamental belief that it is impossible to heal outside of the community, that you can only heal if the community heals. And I've believed that for a long time, but this project has made me absolutely clear that that is true, that we can only heal if we are healing together. And we can only heal if we clean up this collective consciousness that we're living in.
Well, City of Joy, I must say, it is one of the most extraordinary places on this planet. And it's a glimpse of another world.
Mm.
It is like walking through a portal into another kind of possibility. And there's a film about it if people want to know more about City of Joy. It's on Netflix, right? What's it called, V?
City of Joy.
It's called City of Joy.
And I want to say something in relationship to that, because I get to say something about Naomi. Her book, Doppelganger, is amazing. It's a masterpiece. And it is so layered and so brilliant and so important to read right now about where we are and where we're headed and what's happening amongst us. And I feel very proud that you wrote some of it on my...
I did.
And I really urge you all, if you haven't gotten it, to go and get it immediately.
Well, thank you, V. I mean, we wrote our books literally in conversation with each other, and they are in conversation with each other. And I did write it in that beautiful, beautiful home of yours, part of it. And that's when I took that photograph on the back cover. So it's all woven, and it was really fun to be able to do this event with you. And thank you all for listening. And thank you, Banyen Books, for hosting us, and for doing so many of these wonderful events. And I think V is going to close us out with one last reading, which is, of course, going to give us a lot to think about. But I'll just say goodbye now. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Naomi.
Thanks so much to both of you.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's been here tonight, for listening, for spending your time with us. And really, it's so generous that you just came to hear us talk. And I'm going to end with a piece called Where All the Grief. I used to wonder where all the grief of all the people went. I would stare at strangers in parks and restaurants, inspecting their faces for cracks of sorrows. The grief was everywhere, but nowhere you could touch. I felt it in my room at night, not ghostly exactly, but thick and pressing in. On my haunches, I rocked myself to sleep to shake off the suffocating apparition. I felt it in the clinking ice cubes of my parents' cocktail hour. I felt it in the sluggish walk of those who worked for the rich. I felt it in the way my perfect, beautiful mother could not be found. I felt it in the manic boys grabbing at my teenage tits. I was terrified the grief was waiting somewhere, terrified it was gathering, terrified it would return one day and swallow us whole. And maybe it has, or is. What is the military but the saluted straitjacket of our mourning? What are drones, assault rifles, and bombs but steely weapons aimed at our sadness or anyone or thing that resembles it? What is pornography but a gaudy performance of our deepest loss and longing? Today, I stood in front of the muddy river in my backyard after days of rain. I thought of every river I've ever met. every ocean and lake. I thought of the salty aqua Adriatic that has healed bitterness and bites in July. I thought of Juhu Beach in Chennai, the procession of women of every age in their glittering pink, purple, golden saris at sunset, and the ambling cows. I never saw a cow on a beach before. I thought of the rough nakedness of the Atlantic at the tip of Montauk in late September, and dunking my bald head, the salt water stinging, and cleansing the nicks where I shaved the hairs falling from the chemo. I thought of the Red Sea and Sharm el-Sheikh and how all of us sought refuge there right after the bombing, and how my sister from Somalia told me always when the militias come, run to the sea. I thought of the first time I crossed Lake Kivu from Goma to Bukavu in Congo, and the soft blue waxen horizon seemed at odds with so many macheted bodies below. And my tears were muddy, humid tears that linked me to a muddy river in the village of Kosovo, where the children were playing among the garbage and human skulls, linked me to cartoon communities of kooky penguins on the sandy beaches of Cape Town, linked me to belly dancers moving with the rhythm of subtle waves on the narrow boat on the Nile, linked me to the wild low tide in Marabucay, Philippines. My muddy tears linked me to the Seine, which is sometimes brown and sometimes green or black, depending on the light. And just weeks ago, it was rising unnaturally, flooding the city. The river linked me to Flint River in Michigan, 25,000 kids exposed to lead poisoning, some with scabies and rashes, some stopped growing, some got aggressive, and the children dying in the Niger Delta before they reached the hospital from the oil-contaminated water. Life expectancy now dropped from 70 to 45. Oil, tears of oil, the carelessness of BP spilling oil and exploding oil in the Gulf of Mexico. I sat down by the river and I wept for the lead in the water. I wept for every ocean I've ever met and haven't met. I wept for dolphins trapped in huge plastic wrappers and albatrosses on Midway Atoll filled with bottle caps and batteries mistaken for food. I wept for the children who would never know what it means to run arms open into a voluptuous sea without worry, who see water as predator and not as source. I wept for our selfishness and stupidity. I wept for all those who will not weep and cannot weep and refuse to let their weeping join them to the sea of weeping, the muddy river of grieving. I wept for the 16-year-old girl who trusted the sea more than her own mother. She would lay her naked, lean body half in, half out of the water, long brown hair becoming sand, broken shells, and stone. And she would strongly whisper, almost chant, make me clam, coral, weed, make me jellyfish, trumpet conch, and crab, make me salty blue, make me transparent, make me wild.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.